In the heart of a quiet suburban neighborhood, one man's backyard barbecue sparked more than just flames. When a rule-obsessed HOA president tried to shut him down, Greg Johnson fought back with smoke, lights, and a towering volcano. What started as a petty dispute turned into a community rebellion. This is not just a story about grilling. It's about standing up when the rules go too far. Stay tuned, you won't believe how it all erupted. Greg Johnson was the kind of man who preferred a slow pace of life. He loved the quiet of Pleasant Valley Estates, a suburban neighborhood where the biggest excitement was watching the neighbors trim their hedges or mowing their lawns on a Saturday morning. Greg wasn't much of a rule breaker, but he did enjoy a good barbecue on his back porch. His old barbecue grill, Betsy, had been with him for years, a seasoned, rusted piece of metal that had cooked countless meals and had become more than just a tool. It was a symbol of his easygoing, relaxed lifestyle. To Greg, Betsy wasn't an eyesore. It was a reminder of simpler times and memories made over sizzling steaks and hamburgers. But for Karen Henderson, the HOA president, it was a blight on the neighborhood. Karen Henderson had a reputation. The president of the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association had an obsessive need for control. Nothing in the neighborhood was ever good enough for her standard. Everything had to be pristine, neat, and perfectly coordinated. It didn't matter that Greg's grill was functional. Karen had decided it was too rusty, too unsightly. She demanded that he replace it, threatening fines if he didn't comply. First, Greg tried to shrug it off. Who cared about an old grill? But as Karen's complaints became more frequent and her demands more aggressive, something inside him snapped. The rules of the HOA were stifling, suffocating the creativity and personal expression of the homeowners. He wasn't going to let her bully him into throwing away something that brought him joy. One night, as Greg sat on his back porch, staring at the grill and letting his thoughts simmer, he decided he'd had enough. He wasn't going to simply get rid of Betsy. He would send a message. And what better way to do it than with the biggest, most ridiculous barbecue creation the neighborhood had ever seen. Thus, the Volcano Barbecue Pit was born. Greg began working on his grand plan the very next day. What started as a simple act of rebellion soon became an obsession. He designed a towering structure, a massive volcano that would dominate his backyard. It would stand 10 feet tall, with LED lights making the lava flow glow like real molten rock. He added simulated smoke effects, rumbling sounds, and the pièce de résistance, a high-end smoker built right into the volcano's core. Greg wasn't just building a barbecue pit. He was building a spectacle. Days turned into weeks as Greg poured his heart and soul into the project. It was no longer about a grill. It was about proving a point. The more Karen pushed him, the more Greg pushed back. He wasn't just defying HOA rules. He was taking a stand against the very idea that anyone could control his enjoyment of his own property. When the volcano was finished, it was everything he had hoped for: bigger, bolder, and more outrageous than anyone could have imagined. The first test run was a sight to behold. As Greg fired up the smoker, thick clouds of smoke billowed out from the volcano, rising into the air. The rumbling sounds of the eruption were so convincing that even Greg had to take a step back and admire his creation. It didn't take long before the neighbors started to notice. Soon, a fire engine, 2 police cars, and a small crowd had gathered outside Greg's house, drawn by the plume of smoke and the dramatic display. Karen arrived, furious, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She immediately accused Greg of endangering the neighborhood, saying that his volcano was a fire hazard and an eyesore. Greg didn't flinch. "There's no fire here," he said with a smile. "It's just a bit of smoke and some theatrics. No harm done." The fire captain walked over to Greg, examining the structure. After a brief inspection, The captain nodded and assured the crowd that everything was under control. The smoke was controlled, and the structure posed no danger. Yet Karen's outrage only grew. She demanded that Greg dismantle the volcano immediately, claiming it violated community standards and aesthetic values. But Greg was having none of it. He stood tall, refusing to back down. "There's nothing in the HOA rules that says I can't have a volcano in my own backyard," he said, his voice steady and confident. "This is my property, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I can and can't do with it." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood became divided. Greg's Volcano BBQ had become the talk of the community. Some neighbors were impressed, even entertained by the spectacle. They had never seen anything like it. Others, however, were too intimidated by Karen's position to speak up. Still, Greg pressed on, continuing to host barbecue parties and gatherings at his volcano. Every time Karen showed up to complain, Greg would offer her a plate of food and a drink, ignoring her attempts to control him. The HOA, however, was relentless. They passed new bylaws, restricting thematically excessive landscape features. The rule was clearly designed to target Greg's volcano, and it was a direct response to his defiance. But instead of backing down, Greg did something unexpected. He hired a lawyer to make sure his rights were protected. At a community meeting, Greg stood before the residents, ready to make his case. The room was packed. Tension hung in the air as Karen took her seat at the front. Her eyes fixed on Greg, the residents, many of whom had stayed silent for weeks, now waited to hear what Greg had to say. With a grin, Greg took the microphone. "I've read the bylaws, and I've spoken to my lawyer." He began. "Nowhere in those rules does it say that I can't build a volcano. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not causing any real damage. All I'm doing is having a little fun and expressing myself. And that's something we should all be allowed to do." His speech was full of humor, but there was a seriousness to it too. Greg wasn't just defending his volcano. He was defending the right to live freely, to make your own choices, and to create something that brought joy to others. He pointed out that the HOA's rules had become an oppressive force that stifled creativity and individuality. The community needed to be about more than just keeping everything perfect. It needed to be a place where people could live, laugh, and be themselves. As Greg spoke, the room began to shift. Neighbors who had remained quiet started to nod in agreement. They saw the point he was making. Karen's grip on the community started to loosen, and by the end of the meeting, many residents were questioning her authority. Karen, humiliated and furious, tried to regain control, but it was too late. Greg had won. The neighborhood had rallied behind him, and the HOA's latest attempt to stifle his creativity had backfired. The Volcano BBQ wasn't just a symbol of Greg's rebellion. It had become a symbol of freedom, a reminder that sometimes it's not about following the rules. It's about standing up for what you believe in. In the weeks that followed, Pleasant Valley Estates transformed. The rigid rules of the HOA seemed less important, and people started to embrace a new sense of community. The Volcano BBQ became a gathering place for neighbors, who now found themselves united not by conformity, but by creativity and fun. Greg threw a huge BBQ party in celebration of his victory. The community came together to celebrate not just his victory, but the new spirit of inclusivity and freedom that had taken root. Greg's volcano, once seen as a threat, had become the heart of the neighborhood. As for Karen, she faded into the background, her authority irreparably damaged. The HOA's hold on the neighborhood was no longer as powerful as it once had been. Greg had proven that, sometimes, standing up for yourself and what you believe in is more important than following the rules. His victory wasn't just about a volcano, it was about freedom, community, and the power of standing together against overreach. The Volcano BBQ had become a lasting symbol of what one man, armed with humor, courage, and a little creativity, could achieve. It was a lesson that would resonate throughout the neighborhood for years to come.